Well, this is a privilege to talk to Mystery Furtado today from Diabeat-It here in London, and I'm really looking forward to you explaining all about that organization. Mystery, you and I got to know one another a couple of years ago during the pandemic, right?
Yes,
and
we did.
Formed kind of a good partnership there with your organization and with our own, and you've expanded out from there. But for some of our folks who maybe don't know too much about you, can you give us a bit of your background?
Yes, so I'm Mystery Furtado. I'm the founder of Type Diabeat-It, and we are a non-for-profit here in London, and we support marginalized and low-income families who have diabetes. Currently, diabetes, affects 1 in 3 Canadians, and when we look at, marginalized communities, people of color, people who have low income, these barriers increase the rates of diabetes in the community. So we try to focus a lot on cultural competence in care, and also looking at food as a vital key for not only prevention but empowerment and management of diabetes. So increasing access to fresh produce that are culturally competent.
Yes, I mean, that's kind of how we first met you. I mean, I remember you and some of the younger kids moving around the back of the food bank, planting plants, and how you were trying to teach them about good nutrition and things like that. Within the Black community in London, I know that there is a real desire on your part to get to kids that are in schools and other things to give them education. How has that gone for you? Have you been able to get into many schools, or what's happened there?
So I've been able to get into one school at this time. We have a pilot project with Holy Rosary, whereby we are featuring foods from the African diaspora, talking about their nutritional values, and also how to create healthy meals that are mostly plant-based using fresh produce, and empowering them to be able to make healthier lifestyle choices by giving them world knowledge, having a sense of representation in the curriculum, and targeting health from a tasty way, because food is universal. So we don't have to speak the same language or even look the same to be able to enjoy a nice plate of food. So thanks to working with the London Food Bank and yourself, our project has been able to expand a little bit from a community garden to a greenhouse project that's coming up, again, supported by the food bank, and now having a curriculum that we hope to see in schools across London. So starting slowly with a pilot with the Catholic School Board, we're at Holy Rosary, and hopefully we're able to impact more students as time goes by.
You know, I have 3 kids, as you know, from South Sudan, and when they came here to London, I mean, I remember we took them to a grocery store. They'd never been in anything like that before, but they immediately migrated to the kind of foods that you actually don't want them to migrate towards, right? The kind of things, lots of starch, lots of sugar. It was a real challenge to try to remind them that their traditional ways of eating were very, very important, right? Yes. And it's still a struggle to this day, actually, with them to try to get to eat some of that stuff. But is that what you find as well, is that the kids usually have a preference for the things that kids usually do, and it's really through education and the parents being involved that you're able to get them to start making healthier choices? Do I have that correct?
Yes, you have it spot on. And that is because when we talk about food from a cultural lens, our migration movement has impacted our eating patterns, as you've rightfully said, right? When we come to Canada or to a developed country, we will naturally gravitate to things that are easier, things that fit more into our everyday lifestyle, right? We're busy, there's jobs, it's the quick and easy, it's the fast. So what this curriculum is able to do is to give these students a buy-in to see themselves reflected in the material and in the food, and give them that push to want to be able to go back home, because there's a disconnect, right? We come here, we don't find our food, so we eat something different that, as you said, might not be the greatest. Plus, kids love sugar. That's across the board, right? You know, it's hard to tap out of that. But if we're able to create more meaningful experiences, right? Because something I've been learning is that access doesn't mean equity. So when we use those words, we're looking at the experience. So if we're able to get them to have that experience with the food, that emotional attachment will then help them to later on want to cook like this and understand why they need to eat like this, right?
I really like what you said there, that access doesn't necessarily get that kind of equality. I think that that's really true. We see that in Indigenous communities as well. I did want to ask you we'll talk about Toronto in a minute because, I know you've been looking at some of the things they're doing there. But as you look at London, kind of in the context of Canada, how aware do you think we really are of these kind of things compared to other communities? Or do you think we're just kind of on the verge of it? I don't really know well enough, but I'm sure you do. But where do you think London is at in all of that?
If I'm able to be very honest, I think that London is a little behind compared to other communities in the surrounding area. And I think it would be right to say that we are on the verge. I keep seeing a lot of the words on paper. And I for one, or our organization help, we want to be a part of moving those words from the paper and making sure that the people we're using these words about actually have those experiences and feel that way, right? It's a lot of equity, inclusivity, diversity. There's a lot of, job postings, a lot of words and trainings, but what does that feel like to people who look like me or people who are marginalized, right? Do I feel that way? And that's been my question in London, right? We need to start to slowly work off words off paper and make sure that, it's transcending to these communities. So I do think that we're getting there, but we do have a little bit of work to do.
I think it's important that you're honest. I think that's true. I know when I first met you, you opened up my eyes to some of these things. Mystery, it's really important. In Toronto, they have what they call the Black Food Sovereignty Plan. Is that correct? So I presume they're farther down the road than we are on this, whether it's in research or whatever it is. It might be helpful if you could just go over some of that with us here. And then is something like that, probably in a smaller scale, possible to produce in London? What do you think about that?
Yes, I think that is something that we can reproduce in London. This Black Food Sovereignty Plan was developed by city councillors, for in Toronto, and they came together and they conducted the research. So what I love about it is that it was specific to Toronto, but it gives us a rubric that other cities can follow to better support marginalized communities, right? And what they focus on is the difference between food insecurity or food security versus, food sovereignty, right? Because food insecurity tends to give off this connotation that it's just a lack of food or, food not being produced or processed in a timely manner, right? Yeah. When we talk about food sovereignty, we're talking about food and hunger. Food is a right. Right? Hunger is a direct result of not being able to properly access the food because of governmental distribution and other factors. So the document makes a very clear distinction on the two and why we should focus more on food sovereignty, because it helps these marginalized communities to work on people power and create that system where they can find cultural produce, right? So I found it very beneficial. It also gave certain statistics about the fact that about 3.8% of, people who are Black are basically living in food insecure homes, right? That's a significantly high number. And for Toronto, they spoke about, 36.6% of children ages 12 to 18 live in food insecure homes. So these are significant high numbers. And I would be interested to know what those numbers would look like in London, right? How far off are we or how close are we, right? What is going on here? So it is something I wanted to bring up because I feel like there's a lot that we can model, because I believe we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I think we can work collaboratively to, brush off the wheel and make it function better. Yeah. So I think it's a good rubric that we, as a city, we should be looking to follow.
Yeah. London a few years ago produced, this massive Middlesex London food assessment. It was not just all about London, but it was all the food that it was in the area. It was a massive thing. We were involved with that along with a number of other agencies. But really, it's a thick document, about that thick, full of all this kind of. But this information is not so much in that that you're talking about. So it would be interesting for something like the Food Policy Council or some kind of research group to do that, to update that assessment and put this component in it so that that's a part of it. Because I know that the cities love to get these kind of food assessments and see them, but quite often they reflect what is kind of a bias even in the documentation of what people feel and what they've been exposed to. So that would be great for London. But in Toronto, how does that process move ahead? So you said that city councillors were interested in it. How did it move on from there? Like, does it get passed? Does it anyway? Just tell me how it moved forward in Toronto and got the profile that it did.
Yes, so I'm not able to comment exactly how they even probably got funding to do the research, but I know that it was moved by city councillors in Toronto, and then they came up with a strategic plan. So when you continue to the documents, they have a plan as to how to address this, who we should be talking to, and at this time, I cannot say for sure if they've already started the implementation phase of the strategic recommendation, but the document is there with a clear guideline as to where as the city council can start and how other organizations like myself who would be in the GTA plays a part, in all of it. So for instance, London, where, we don't have many not-for-profit organizations that are ethnoculturally in the sense of targeting health and food security, while in Toronto there's a number of them that actually run food programs, right? So something that Type Diabeat-It we're hoping to be able to accomplish this year or in another year is that we're able to actually have food, like give out food more on a consistent basis, hence the greenhouse, and not just the raw food, but also, creating into a meal. Right? So how does that look for us? And that would be something new again for the city. Again, this has been done in Toronto and other places in the GTA, whereby there's more than just like, come get the food, the raw food, we'll create it into a meal that's healthy. And a part of cultural competence is using what is grown here naturally and adding herbs and spices to the food. And that makes it cultural, right? So spaghetti squash is easily grown here, and you put some curry on that, and there's your cultural beautiful blend, right? You have spaghetti curry squash, right? So it's creating spaces to have these types of conversations to better, support and empower our community.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also to grow your own as well is really important, so that people are part of that entire process. I know that you're looking forward to using a greenhouse to be able to provide some of that, and I think that's really important. How far along are you on that?
So unfortunately, we still have snow on the ground. I hoped that we would have been set up by now. So as soon as we get the snow out and the soil the ground is a bit soft, we will be setting up at the Western Fair. We will be sharing, a space with the growing chefs. So I'm pretty excited to have that collaboration and be in the same space as they will be. Luis and I at the greenhouse, we've already started to set seedlings indoors. And right now I'm just working with different community groups. I had a meeting with Sir Frederick Banting Black Association. They recently formed the Black Association for Youths. I had a great meeting with them. So I have a lot of hands ready to learn and ready to plant, and also being able to support the community. We will be supporting officially with our harvest the HIV Connect here in London.
That's awesome, Mystery. I think that really looking forward to that. We'll have to get some good video of that. And
Yes.
I'm glad Luis is helping out as well. He's so great. So that's good. You also, when you speak and you talk to people, you talk about the Public Health Agency of Canada, also around things like data around diabetes and health and other things. Can you go over some of that? Because obviously you studied it and there's some really interesting things in there. What are some of the highlights?
So one of the biggest highlight that really ties into our conversation around food insecurity is the costs that diabetics have to incur. And this is not just numbers that reflect marginalized people or low-income people. These are numbers that are for all Canadians, right? And the cost per year is over like $5,000 to $6,000 in medication and supplies, right? Because I learned this term called the working poor while I volunteer at London Inter-Community Health Center. And that's a very gray area whereby you might be working, but then you don't meet the qualifications to have some of your supplies subsidized. So you got to pay for it out of your pocket. Okay. And if you think of that number per year coming out of your pocket, and on top of that, being low income, probably not even having a full-time job with benefits, how does one put the interest or the time or have the extra resources to access quality produce?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, I saw direct linkages why certain communities are even more impacted. Because if all Canadians are having this cost, imagine having other systematic barriers to that access. So food tends to take a backstage role for all of us. And right now the document is saying that we have 1 in 3 Canadians who are just unaware that they have diabetes. There's 2 million Canadians being diagnosed with diabetes, and that we need to take a more active and proactive role in all of this to be able to support, because we have about 46% of them going into dialysis, renal failure, another 50% having heart attack. So the document outlines, I guess, all the scary impacts that diabetes has and the growing numbers for our community. And it just, for me, is an encouragement to talk about this, to let people are aware that, diabetes is a problem and it comes with many complications, and that, as a community, we need to be aware of our health status and work together and be a part of the whole empowerment journey. And I find that on a whole, outside of this document, as in Canada, we struggle a little bit with the prevention, right? We're very good with the chronic care. We're very good to take care of you, patch you up, and send you home. But as a country, we need to, I think, and the government is talking about this. There's more and more money being allocated to prevention, right? Yep. And I'm happy to see it, because the reality is we lack consistent information about diabetes prevention for all Canadians, right? So these documents highlight these things, and it helps to push the government to allocate funding, which they have. Yeah. And we're hoping to, be big enough to be able to benefit from some of these grants, so that we can continue our work.
In this national data that's there around diabetes and other things, I know that when we look at the Indigenous community, they're disproportionately represented in those numbers, right? Is that true for the Black community as well?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah. So the Indigenous community, the Black community, I believe South Asian and the Latin community are what's highlighted in all these documents.
Yeah. I mean, and when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because many within those communities have also lacked economic opportunities, access to certain other things that would be required. So it makes sense. So I would think, after hearing all that, and I know you've got a real heart for kids, which is awesome. I've seen you at the back of the food bank working with them. It was just so rewarding for me to watch how you work with them. But I presume the real answer for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, and we've not talked about this, but I would have to think that the school system is really the key. right? That
Yes.
somehow within our school system to teach kids about proper nutrition, give them the chance to get their hands in the soil, right? Also
Yes.
give them the chance to understand their own culturally appropriate foods that they had originated from. Would I be correct in saying that? Now you say you're in one school, but am I correct in thinking that you actually really want to get out there and get out into way more schools?
Yes, that is exactly what we're hoping for. And we're hoping that after this pilot, other schools and principals and the school boards can see the benefit, because you touched on something very key, getting your hands in the soil, right?
Yeah.
That brings that connection, that brings that experience, right? And you don't have to be, a set community to benefit from getting your hands in the soil. And our curriculum does exactly that. So last week, we planted a little herb garden. I was talking to Jane about it and Luis, and we were able to get them little kits so that they can plant the little herb gardens. And then we spoke about the different herbs and where they came from in the world, right? And how do we use them? And all the kids are able to tell me where their mom or dad stores the herbs and what they use it for and different recipes, right? And it's so interactive, and they got to make little herb gardens. And that is important for kids to understand, their connection, to see themselves reflected, right? And, in the schools, we talk about the Canadian Food Guide, but there's so much diversity in Canada that many of us don't go home and relate to that food guide, right? So we need other materials that other students can relate to, so that they understand why the food guide was created in the first place. Because it's a great guide. We just need to add a little bit of, different lens.
Yeah. Just be honest. I think, we've had a number of groups that have, that we assist. We also help out in a whole bunch of schools with breakfast programs and other things. But I know there's community groups sometimes who have, around food, have tried to get those kind of things into schools and have really had difficulty. Right? The school board is a system. It has its policies. It's related to provincial law as well, and regulations that all come from that. And it's been very difficult. And I know that we as a food bank have backed those groups as they've asked for support to try to get these things into the school. And that's just, with the way that it is, not just in London, but throughout Ontario. I would presume, though, that for kids in a Black community, and especially when you're dealing with things like diabetes and things like that, that those obstacles, I guess some would think those obstacles should fall away because we understand that need. But I presume that the truth is really it's harder. It's harder for you to be able to open some of those doors. Now, am I wrong on that as well? I'm just honestly asking you. I don't know the answer. But has that been your experience, or are you finding that, no, there is a real openness within the schools and the school boards to permit this stuff to move forward?
So, again, if I'm able to speak honestly, I think the difficulty comes from perspective and interpretation, right? So you find that because these are new buzzwords, when certain individuals hear the word, Black community, African diaspora, ethnocultural foods, they automatically close their minds, and it's just for people of color. It's just for low-income people. But that is not the curriculum, right? At a school, your job is to empower, educate, mold, inspire, right? Our curriculum is world knowledge, right? Yeah. It's also bringing extracurricular into the schools. A lot of kids, despite the color, the race, cannot afford extracurricular in Ontario. Yeah. Okay? I think the number was around 30%. Don't quote me, but the last I read it, there's about 30% of our population, kids who cannot afford any type of extracurricular, from soccer to hockey to whatever you name it, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a great piece that, can be used. So I find that there's, they want to be receptive, but there's that hesitation.
Yeah.
So I always have to go back and rephrase my language and say it is health, it's food literacy, it's empowerment, it's food, it's kitchen skills, right? We're cooking, we're talking, we're learning. It's not something that should be isolated for just a small group of people. And I think that is where the hindrance or the resistance lies. Is I am always forced or tasked to I think constantly be cognizant of the words that I use to make sure they're not interpreting it in the wrong way, in the wrong context.
I would think that if I was in your shoes, that would be maybe the hardest thing, because you should just be able to speak honestly and have it understood, and then we try to find a way to make that work, right? But it doesn't work that way. And I know, and then you have to deal with people like myself and others who are having to learn and have their minds opened up towards some of these things that we haven't seen before. You must be developing a thicker skin. You also must be developing a broader language, because you're going to have to use different kind of language in different situations. I presume that's correct for you?
Yes, that's very correct. I think I've been skilled in not taking things personally, and just working with my allies, working with great people like yourself and the food bank, who are able to also help to speak on the things that I'm trying to bring awareness to, and to validate what I'm saying, right? Because I think sometimes, on a whole, like you said, change is not easy. Adopting something different, there's always that hesitation. But I find that I try to stick to facts, and I try to talk about precedents being set, and attack or approach it as objective as possible, and do the reminder, right? I don't want the curriculum to be washed aside to it's just for people of color. No, that is the equity, the inclusivity, the representation. This curriculum is all the words that we keep using, and it's also really much empowerment and helping children to want to get involved in their food, and not want to just go to the grocery store and buy sugar or candy. Because if little Johnny plants a cucumber, he's going to want to go home and cook it. Okay. And mommy and daddy are going to be forced to cook that or to cut it up, because he played a role in growing it and harvesting it. Right. So is that. Yeah. That's that experience I'm talking about. That's that feeling of belonging, right? I did something. I did this. And then we have that ripple effect. So it's very important to open kids to these type of knowledge, grow their vocabulary, grow their knowledge of the word and food, right? Some of these ethnocultural foods are available at the grocery store, but we might just pass it because we don't know what to do with it. And even if you're a person of color and you've been here for 10 years, you may have forgotten how to even cook the thing, right? So why are you going to buy it? But with this, I'm able to encourage you to remember how to cook it, and somebody else can also try it, and we can learn, and we can feature different foods, right?
I do think, Mystery, that Canada is in a whole kind of redefinition around food. Not what it is, per se, but they're learning about food insecurity. They're learning about access. Now they're learning about prices, right, for obvious reasons. But food has become a very, very important issue. I met with a city councillor just this last week, wanting to learn more about food insecurity and what's happening in communities. The good side of that is that I think that opens up doors to, we have to make sure we just then don't go back down the traditional paths that we did in the past as we have tried to fix these things, but to realize that our own populations have changed within our communities, and it's much more diverse as we come to look at things like food security and food opportunity and health and those kind of things. It's very essential for you to keep hammering at the door and coming to people like me and Jane and others and helping us to understand better. But I think it's also really up to us, those of us who are involved in the food industry in one way or another, to make sure that as we focus on this now with a lens, that we have learned from the experience of people like you and others, and we keep those parameters wide so that more people are more included with it. I don't know where we would be without people like you doing that, Mystery. I mean, seriously, we need that kind of help in a community. I really thank you for taking on that role. I know it's not easy, and I know we played a little part in it, not much. It's you that's really championing this. Maybe we should circle back in another few months, and once you've got these things in the ground and the snow is gone, and we can do some more talking about what it is that needs to move forward on this. Thank you for talking to us, Mystery. I really appreciate you doing it. All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Mystery.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV.